My name is Caroline McGraw, and I'm a writer with The Clearing Northwest. The Clearing is a 12-step alternative dual diagnosis residential addiction treatment center with a unique recovery program based in spiritual psychology. Today we're speaking with author and activist Christopher Kennedy Lawford. He has spent 20 years in the film and TV industries as an actor, lawyer, executive, and producer. He's the author of 2 New York Times bestselling books, Symptoms of Withdrawal, 3, Moments of Clarity, and Recover to Live is the 3rd one. Got it. He's been in recovery from drug addiction for more than 25 years, and he campaigns on behalf of the recovery community. To learn more about him, visit ChristopherKennedyLawford.com. And in this interview, we're talking with Christopher about his new book, When Your Partner Has an Addiction, which is co-written with Beverly Engel. Our focus is on healing core issues and trauma recovery, since that is what we do here at The Clearing. So welcome, Christopher. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, Caroline. Thanks for having me.
Just to get started, let's do a very quick overview of your recovery and your journey. So could you tell us a bit about how your addiction began and some of the underlying core issues that were really driving it?
Well, I've been actually in long-term recovery for 30 years, and I began my drug and alcohol use when I was 12 years old, as a lot of people do, and facing adolescence. And I think I talk about it as being an addictive perfect storm. I had the genetics that ran in my family. I also had the trauma from the assassination of 2 of my uncles, which was replayed every day for 50 years, basically. So I had a form of PTSD that was never acknowledged or talked about, and certainly never treated. And then also this was 68, 69, so I grew up in a very permissive time in history that with very little understanding about this issue, about drug and alcohol. There was something known about alcoholism, but very little known about the drugs that everybody was taking. As a matter of fact, I remember when cocaine came out, everybody said it was good for you. So intergenerational drug use, and obviously no ability for the family to do much about it in terms of intervention or treatment. So that was my perfect storm, and it began when I was 12 and ended when I was 30.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so glad that you came through that storm and we get to talk about it today. So your new book, When Your Partner Has an Addiction, I found it so helpful. Especially, there's this one profound line, it's at the very beginning. No one consciously chooses an addiction to a substance or behavior over his or her partner. There are always reasons, powerful ones, why a person retreats into addiction. So can you tell us, what are some of those powerful reasons why people retreat into addiction?
Well, you have to look at addiction and the behaviors and the chemicals that people take as a form of treatment. They're trying to treat some underlying causes and conditions. Most of those have to do with trauma, family of origin issues, and those issues. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. No worries.
Those issues are usually not really well known to the people that are beginning this. Because obviously a lot of this behavior starts when folks are younger. They have little understanding about the causes and conditions that are forcing them to look for solutions that they're not getting through the normal channels. And that can, so it's a combination of a need to treat and an inability to find adequate treatment, whether that's a family relations or whatever it is. So that's the, and the more I think, the other issue is I've been an advocate now for 11 years, and I've seen a major shift in our society's willingness to talk about these things and our obvious understanding of what's really going on here. The brain science, the social and psychological advancements that we've made in terms of dealing with this issue, the acknowledgement of trauma as a major factor in these things. So that's going to change the landscape, because this is a disease that thrives in isolation. And I think the a lot of people talk about the rat studies that were done at the National Institute of Health as a validation of the power of these behaviors or these chemicals in the brain, in the sense that if you put a rat in a cage and you put a metal bar down that shocks them, they won't go across that bar for the major biological imperatives: sex, food, and water. But if you addict them to these chemicals, they'll go across that bar every day. Now, they did a follow-up in BC, in British Columbia, to that, and they had a bunch of rats in the cage. And rats in community do not demonstrate the same things that rats in isolation demonstrate, and that's true for human beings also. So a lot of this has to do, I did a book called Recover to Live, and I worked, I was working for the United Nations at the time as a Goodwill ambassador, and there's a guy over in Vienna named Gilberto Guerra, who's a very smart doctor. He was educated in Italy and France, and he was the one who single-handedly really changed the focus of the UN from strictly source eradication to actually treating this illness. And his theory is the greatest prevention for this illness is the family dining room table. People sit down to eat and know what's going on in each other's lives. This disease cannot exist as easily.
That is such a great point. You have this great line in your book that it is disconnection that drives addiction. And that if you have those strong connections, you're a lot less likely to turn to drugs or alcohol.
That's correct.
But you also have made a great point there about trauma and how trauma is connected to addiction. And so when we speak about trauma, obviously there's a medical definition, but then there's also psychological one, that it's your subjective experience. But that said, abuse and neglect are pretty universally traumatic. So can you talk a bit about more why there's such a strong link between trauma in childhood and addiction in adulthood?
Well, I just did an interview with a really smart guy named Neil Steinberg, who's written a lot about this. And he actually, in the interview, we talked about trauma, and he basically said in the piece that he thought trauma was basically an excuse that people use for this kind of behavior, because there are plenty of people who suffer trauma who don't develop a chemical dependency or a behavioral addiction, which is true.
Right.
However, the existence of a genetic predisposition coupled with trauma, or the lack of a sufficient social construct. That and I'll give you a personal example from my life. My daughter is in long-term recovery 6 years now, and she suffered trauma because I left her mom, and she was 11 years old, and it was very traumatic for her. And she adored me, and it was really a huge thing. And she began a period of depression, anxiety, and chemical use. And she found out that later on, when she was 19, that she actually qualifies as an alcoholic and a drug addict. So she has the genetics, she had the trauma, and she developed the illness. The difference was that she had two parents, although we weren't together, and there was a lot of acrimony, but now there's not. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff that went on. We were able to intervene in her life in a significant way, and she's changed her trajectory. So whereas it took me until I was 30 years old, and 10 years of that was actively trying to get clean and sober, and nothing worked for me. She was able to do it because the intervention happened early, it happened significantly, and she also had a culture around her in Los Angeles where she could plug into something that meant something. Nobody thought that I couldn't go back into the environments that I was coming out of when I went to treatment. There was no concept that maybe it's not the best idea for Chris to go back to the Upper East Side of New York and live, 20 blocks away from a methadone clinic or whatever, or shooting gallery. So
right.
that was, there's a lot, the issue with this illness, why it's so challenging is because it's so complicated. There's not one answer. So the trauma piece, I would argue that it's traumatic being a human being.
I would too.
Okay. And I would also argue that in my experience, there's no science for this, but anecdotal experience is that the alcoholics and drug addicts that I know are hypersensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people that poo-poo that and they go, well, yeah, everybody's sensitive and blah blah blah. Well, I'm not buying it. I'm just not buying it. I'm just saying that there's some people that are more sensitive than others. Many people that have this illness are. Many of them also have, exacerbated trauma. Mm-hmm. And if you have that in genetics, you're a sitting duck.
Yeah. Oh, that is such a great point. I agree. And that, there's this myth that you talk about in the book that, that people who struggle with addiction, they're unloving or they're incapable of love. And I hear what you're really saying is that often they're actually very sensitive and very, invested, and they care a lot. And often that's why they turn to drugs, because it's like they need to cope with their high sensitivity in this sometimes traumatic world.
Right. And let's be clear. Mm-hmm. These medications are enormously effective.
Yeah.
Until they're not. And even when they're not, people are addicted to the memory of how effective they are. Nora Volkow, who's one of the smartest people in the world on this issue and runs the National Institute of Drug Abuse, says that addiction isn't about anything but memory.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and she's right. She's absolutely right. Because as we all know, these things stop working.
Yeah.
But the memories, when they did work, are so profound and they work so well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's the difficulty. And that's why obviously opioid addiction is particularly problematic, because that works better than anything. Yeah.
Right. Wow, I love that addiction is about memory. Wow, and especially if you're someone who carries around a lot of shame or guilt or hurt, then that memory is so compelling of a time where you felt good, you felt free, you felt happy. So can you talk a bit about the role of shame in addiction?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that this illness just itself has a lot of shame attached to it.
Yeah.
And it's real shame because, the other issue is that, we understand this is a disease. We understand that it's connected to, it's a brain illness. We understand there's genetics involved. We understand there's trauma involved. We understand all of these things. But truthfully, most people have a difficult time separating out an addict's culpability. Somehow, a person who has diabetes or hypertension isn't responsible for that, but an addict is really responsible on some level for the continuation of their addiction, because there's a volitional, voluntary act of picking up the syringe or the drink that other people go, well, just don't pick it up.
Yeah.
And which makes sense. I mean, it's why Just Say No is such a thing, but it's absolutely wrong. And you're never going to convince people, even addicts, by the way. You get into a 12-step room and there's a lot of people who start sounding like Nancy Reagan after a little even though they know better.
Yeah.
They're like, well, obviously you're not doing something right because you're continuing to use. I mean, obviously you're not working the program well enough, blah, 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 blah. It's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, those shaming messages and just stop. Why don't you just stop?
Yeah, and then obviously there are other aspects to the behavior. Like, this is a disease where people that have it present in very shameful, negative ways. Whereas if you have cancer or you have diabetes, you're not gonna, drive your car into a crowd of people, or, like throw up on your future mother-in-law, or whatever the behavior is that's like, oh my God, I can't believe he did that.
Yeah, there's a lot of collateral damage.
A lot of collateral shame. And so everywhere you look, there's this piece of it. That's why I keep coming back to, people go, well, why can't we do something about this? Well, it's really complicated. You have to address every aspect of a person's life. Plus, you're going to have to reorient them and re-educate them in terms of what they need to know in order to get a life that that they don't want to throw away again.
Yeah.
Which is really difficult, and which we're not even paying attention to now. We know a lot about, Nora also told me something that's also very smart. She said, we spend a lot of money on prevention, we spend a lot of money on treatment, so we know a lot about those things. We don't spend any money on studying recovery.
Oh.
Recovery is just like, you go to treatment, they hand you a big book, and we'll see you later.
Right.
Now we're getting a little bit more sophisticated. There's some monitoring, there's some, sober coaching, there's some stuff that's not just 12-step based, but as you know, 12 steps don't work for a majority of the people.
Right.
So we've got to develop, we need to know what people need in order to feel good about themselves and get a life. So part of this is dealing with the trauma, dealing with the shame, dealing with the family of origin issues, which most of it will come from, probably. So there's a lot of work to do after treatment.
Yeah. After those initial 28 days, there's still plenty to do.
Oh, there's more. I mean, addiction is 1% initiation of abstinence, 1% acute detoxification, and 98% relapse prevention. And relapse prevention doesn't mean, chemical blockers or monitoring or any of that. That's the early stage stuff. It means life skills and finding out who you are and dealing with the underlying causes and conditions.
Yeah.
It's a lifetime.
That's one of the reasons why I really got so much out of your book, because this idea that we don't hear a lot about how to support people in recovery, you also don't hear a lot about how to be someone's partner in their recovery. Because a lot of times you just get, oh, why would you stay with that person? Why would you put yourself through that? But your book really talks about two distinct roles that people can play to help their loved ones to recover. It talks about what does it mean to be a supporter? What does it mean to be a collaborator? And so can you maybe talk a bit about how partners can help their loved ones in recovery?
Right. Well, again, we give you in when your partner has an addiction, we give basically things that you need to pay attention to. And obviously, the big difference here is that you have a plan, and you both sign on to that plan. Now, no doubt, your partner, the partner with the active addiction, is going to probably forget what the plan is sometimes.
Sure.
That's the nature of things. So that you have to build into your understanding. Doesn't mean you have to accept it. It just means that if you really want to do this, it's a conscious choice, and you're going to make it, and you're going to maybe obviously set boundaries, but also one of their boundaries, maybe I'm going to do this for a year, and if it doesn't work, I'm out.
Yeah. That's
a totally reasonable thing to do. The point is that science has shown that a person who has a partner is more likely to get sober than somebody that doesn't necessarily. So staying with somebody is not a bad thing in and of itself. Up until now, there's always been this idea that that's a bad thing. A plan is a big thing. Educating yourself about this illness is a huge thing if you're the quote-unquote sober person in this thing, because the more you understand about what this illness is, the more compassion you're going to have for your partner. It's just not something he's doing at you. Not to take this thing personally is a huge thing, difficult to do.
Yeah.
But, because, as I say, the way somebody presents is often very personal.
Yeah.
But it's not personal, and the more you can understand the the mental aspect and the psychological aspect of this thing, the more able you might be to accept those things. You know, the shame piece we've already talked about. That's a huge piece in this. Boundaries are everything.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of being able to set boundaries and you know, so this is not, you know, we've said this is not an easy thing to do, but if if you want to do it, there's always, in the past, there's been this thing where if you want to do it, there's something wrong with you.
Exactly.
Right? There's and now I'm not saying there isn't something wrong with you.
Right.
But there's something wrong with you anyways, because generally speaking, if you pick this person, you knew exactly what you were doing. So what are you doing? Are you healing something from your own past? All of those kinds of things, whatever that is, you're going to find out. The other thing is, you know, what in this thing is your piece, because the person who is the quote unquote codependent in this thing is oftentimes more complicated and difficult to treat than the alcoholic or the addict. My experience in my own recovery was I got to dealing with my codependencies after I was 20 years sober. I didn't have a clue about this stuff. Okay, I didn't get to anything like any kind of really dealing with real causes and conditions until I was 15 years sober.
Yeah.
I mean, I was still lying when I was 15 years sober. I mean, it took me a long time. This is a long process, but it can be the greatest thing you do in your life, as in a partnership with somebody, if it works. Even if it doesn't work, you're going to learn a lot.
Yes.
The person is the partner, not the addict. The person is the partner is going to learn a lot. That's what you have to go in. People come to me all the time. They go, "Listen, I've done everything. My daughter, my son, my partner." And I said, "What are you doing for you?" And they go, "I'm not the one with the problem." I hate to tell you, you are.
Yeah, I loved your definition of codependency in the book, because it was different than any one that I have heard before. Just this idea that codependency is this need to create a false self, and it's driven by shame. And so much of addiction is also driven by shame. So you have a lot more in common than you might think on the surface.
That's absolutely true. That's really good news for people that are in this relationship, because, you know, you guys, and by the way, my own personal belief is these folks are what the world needs. They're people who are wrestling with the human condition in a way that is profound. It's deep. And that's why I wrote What Addicts Know, because I believe that we have a lot to give the world. And we are this way for very specific reasons. And if we can get well, we can be enormously powerful and enormously influential in the world and in our relationships.
Yes, that is so true. And I mean, one of the most profound parts of the Clearings workshop that I was in was this point at which we did a gestalt with our addict aspect. And so you talk to the part of you that's addicted, and you realize, like, wow, this part of me is so powerful and strong and resourceful. And, you know, there's this realization, like you said, that if you channel that energy differently, that you can give so much to the world and you can contribute so much.
Absolutely.
So another thing that I really loved in your book, there's this great paradox that you kind of highlight, that on one hand, another person's substance abuse really doesn't have anything to do with you. It's really not about you. It's not personal. But on the other hand, like you said, the odds of that person recovering can go up if they're in a supportive relationship, if you can help by creating a supportive environment. So just a couple practical things that partners can do to be supportive, to create that environment.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, you know, again, first of all, just the consciousness of what you're doing is in and of itself going to do that. Because I remember once when I was deciding to leave my first wife, and who I had all my children with, I spent time with a therapist for about 6 months talking about it. And at the end of that 6 months, he said to me, he goes, well, what about your children? And I realized in that moment that I had become my father. I had become a man who could turn his back on his children, even though I pulled every one of my kids out of my wife's belly. I was there in the room. I was a father. Like, that was what I did. I mean, I was like a uber dad.
Yeah.
And in this period of time, I had become so consumed, which I needed to do, by the way, some level, to get my life, that I had turned my back on my children. I hadn't even considered them. So in that moment, I was like shocked into this, like, oh my God, but I didn't, there was no hesitation. I was like, my kids are a part of my life. That's not, again. And he said, listen, he said, the important thing is that you, in this moment, that you do not recreate unconsciously what was done to you by your parents. You can recreate consciously. I could have sat in that room and said, you know what? Kids are inconsistent with what I want to do with my life right now, so I have to put that over there, and I'm going to go do this over here. I didn't do that. I said, my kids are not negotiable. They're in my life, regardless, no matter what happens, they're there.
Right.
So that's the same thing here. The issue of support means that two people, now, are you going to get through to the alcoholic or the addict? Are they going to understand the gravitas of what you're doing? Probably not. But probably they're going to get it incrementally as you go along. So you stay committed to the things that you say you're going to do in this plan. That is a level of support. It's also a level of consciousness that's in his face or her face every day, and your face, by the way.
Yeah.
So you know what you're doing, and in that way you support each other. Now there are other things, like you don't take things personally, you don't shame, you don't these things, the way you behave, the way you talk about it, your willingness to learn about the illness, shows that you're not just, you have a problem, fix it or I'm out of here.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm trying to learn about what this is, because this is something that is happening to you that is hurting you, and that hurts me. Right. It's a different way of talking about it. Nobody talks that way about this illness. It's like, God, can't you not drink? What's the matter with you? Or, that stuff is, that you have a lifetime of that to overcome too, by the way. Because there's nobody that is in relationship with somebody with this illness that isn't unsupportive.
Yeah.
Seriously, there's nobody. I mean, you 12-step programs, but but even there you'll get people that are, judgmental and about what you're doing and blah blah blah. So it's a difficult thing to do, but it's possible.
Right, that it's a lot harder to find someone who's actually compassionate as opposed to someone who's just judging.
Right, and compassion is, it's an action.
Yeah.
I mean, feeling it in your heart is something that's difficult because of all the things that have been done, probably. So that's a process, and that happens with education. That happens with really having a desire to understand what's really driving this and the kind of pain. Khalil Gibran had a great quote about, not judging the alcoholic until you stand in their shoes and understand what, oftentimes partners have no idea the level of trauma that are in somebody's life that helped create this situation. Just knowing that might, now that's a difficult thing too. And this is where, professional, help and those kinds of things are a huge piece of this, is that you're in some sort of therapeutic relationship together around this. This is not something that necessarily you want to do all by yourself.
Definitely. Well, I want to be careful of your time and everything, but before we go, may I just ask, I know you've done a TED Talk recently about recovery. Can you share a little bit about what that's about?
Right. Well, the idea that solving the addiction piece isn't enough. It's not good enough just to get somebody clean and sober, because that, we know, the outcomes are not very good when we're dealing with that. And that's not necessarily the fault of the treatment industry. It's but but this is an illness that needs to be treated for a significant period of time. We didn't realize until recently that it takes 90 days just for everything to find some kind of equilibrium once once you take these chemicals out of the picture. So, I mean, this is an illness that, you know, they say in AA, don't kill yourself in the first five years, killing the wrong person. It's really true that it takes a very, very long time to treat this. This is a chronic illness that has to be managed for a lifetime. And so my talk is what we need to do is, you know, working on your defects of character and peeing in a cup are not enough. You know, we need to, you know, one of the things that 12-step programs promise and don't deliver for a lot of folks, but for some that get it, is a life beyond your wildest dreams. I got that in my life because I was able to step into a lot of things but I've seen a lot of people that come from all kinds of demographics are able to do that. And so that's, you know, that's kind of what I'm talking about. I'm interested in building a world of recovery, whatever that means. And that means life skills, it means health and wellness, it means, you know, treating this thing as a holistic, you know, thing. And a big piece of that is a spiritual piece. And I'm not talking religion. I'm talking about what kind of spiritual life do you want? Who are you? Finding your authentic self is a huge part of recovery. It gives, you know, now you can say, well, I don't have time, man. I got to go. I've got 3 kids and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's maybe true, but you have time.
Right.
Everybody has time to spend on themselves. You've been drinking for 20 years. You spend a lot of time doing that. You can spend time on your recovery.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. Any final words or encouragements that you want to share?
I think, you know, people ask me all the time, they go, you know, what did you do that gave you this thing? And I said, well, I didn't do that much, except I 2 things. I didn't die, and there's a lot of people dying now, and I always wanted to get better. I always had a desire to get better, and I also had the means to do it. So I could access all sorts of things that a lot of folks can't, but I wanted to get better. And those 2 things, it still took me 10 years. So, but I got there, and I got a life beyond my wildest dreams, and I have 3 kids who have never seen me drunk or stoned, and I've had an amazing life. And I found myself and all that I come from. And the truth is that, it's the greatest journey you can go on. For people, but if you're going to knock on a door and it doesn't open, don't think it's not. You know, you may have to knock 500 times, but it's going to open as long as you don't die and you keep knocking.
Don't give up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you, Caroline.